This is the Committee of the Whole meeting. It is the 24th. Today's the 24th. It's Wednesday at 6 o'clock. And this meeting is specifically to discuss a proposed plan for the proposed income tax that will be on the ballot. Just so that everybody can review a little bit of history. We went through discussions earlier this year regarding additional funding to improve Salem city streets. The debate ensued, and we passed an ordinance to put on the ballot a request for a 1/4% income tax increase for a 5-year period to be collected and spent solely for infrastructure improvements. It was also noted that this is for improvements and not for maintenance and repair, but and that it can only be spent on streets, sidewalks, curbs, and other infrastructure related to the city. So, I think it's important to note that this is one of a number of efforts that are currently underway to try to better the city and try to get the city into good shape for economic development purposes, so that we look good to not just our residents, make our residents proud of the city, but also to visitors that we're trying to attract to the city for better jobs and for increased tax revenues and just to keep our city reverse what has been a downward trend. We have entrance signs that were approved and they're about to be installed at the city entranceways. We've engaged a outside consulting company to come in and help develop plans to focus on the core of the city, the town center. We're reviewing ordinances for the International Building Maintenance Code in order to start instituting better enforcement of the downtown buildings so that they look better. And now we're talking about this income tax and trying to raise some additional funding in order to make the streets look better as you're coming into the city. I think it's very timely that we have a bridge that's being completed also at one of our major entranceways. Again, I want to stress that this tax request is intended for improvements and can only be spent on infrastructure. And up to this point, Mr. Cushman and I have gone back and forth over a number of meetings. This was originally his idea to bring this forth and to ask for this tax increase. Everybody embraced it. So we've had a number of meetings because there needs to be a plan behind this money, and we need to be able to communicate a coordinated plan to the taxpayers. So Mr. Cushman and I had meetings with engineering, we had meetings with the auditor, we had meetings with administration, and we gathered a lot of information. And then last week we had a group meeting that included all of those, administration, engineering, the auditor. We had also there the SOD Center and the Salem, because they represent other groups in the city. And we had the leaders of the local political parties also, because they represent large constituents in the city too. And we all sat around and we discussed, okay, well, what does this money mean if it does go through, and what do we intend to do with this money so that the voters can make sure that they can hold our feet to the fire on this funding should it come through. So with that, this meeting is to kind of bring forward that information that was gathered, bring forward that plan that was put together, and leave it open for council discussion so council can comment and try to come to some agreement on that. So I'm going to pass out now a couple of things. That way. Thanks. I'm going to give one to the press. First of all, to back up a little bit on the money itself and to talk first about our discussions with the auditor, this would generate about $1.2, $1.25 million a year in revenue for 5 years. Now, with that cash flow that would be projected for 5 years, we could get a note at the beginning of that. In other words, we can get about roughly $4.5 to $5 million up front and do most of this work towards the beginning of the 5-year period. It was decided that this is probably the best way to go. We could do this with a note. We don't need to bond it, you know. So, and the cash flow as it comes in from this tax would pay that note back. So there would be no debt at the end of this. So it was said, okay, well, if we're able to do the bulk of the work in the first 2 years, or spend a couple of $1 million per year in the first 2 years, what is it we do that makes most rational sense that would show improvements in the city? So administration put this first list together. It's this list that you'll see. This is a list of the most troubling streets in the city, the ones that cost us the most to patch and repair. So there's 43 streets in this list. It amounts to roughly, what was it, two miles of streets, Ken or John? How many streets total on this list, roughly, miles?
There's 43 segments. There may be a couple of streets that are separated by a few streets that have already been paved. But the total number of segments, I believe, adds up to 43.
Okay, and it's actually a roughly 50,000 feet in length, so we're talking almost 4 miles of streets.
10 miles.
Oh, 10 miles, I'm sorry.
Can't hear you, John.
So these streets are costing us now roughly, what, $43,000 a year in patching?
Yeah, the total number of tons of hot mix and cold mix asphalt that we purchased last year or this year for patching was 386 tons. These streets that are on this handout represent 340 tons. So a lot of the other streets are in a lot better shape. These are the ones that are the worst. Now, we will also reduce the amount of tonnage just by having done 2nd and 3rd Street as part of the 2015 Summer Street program. The amount of work and the cost of the asphalt combined totaled $43,500 in just repairing the streets that are on this sheet. So if the average life expectancy of these streets is 10 years or more, we could expect to save nearly $500,000 in simply the labor of having to fill the potholes.
So phase 1 of the plan, you know, the first step would be to get a note on the projected cash flow. Phase 1 of the plan then is to focus on these streets that are the most troublesome streets. And Pat, if you could zoom in on that map up there so that people can see it. That's this other map that you have. These 43 streets are divided among the 4 wards. As you look at the wards, you know, Ward 1 is in blue, Ward 2 is in kind of a peach color, Ward 3 is in yellow, Ward 4 is in pink. I got those right? So you can see that the streets that are on this list are pretty much spread across the wards. And those would be in phase 1. These streets would be tackled, and the estimated cost is between $2.2, $2.5 million, you know, to do those streets. And that's a significant amount of work to take place in 1 year. That's probably as much as, you know, the city can handle as far as traffic goes and you know, just disruption of the roadways. Phase 2, which would be the next year, would be to focus on those streets that are most highly traveled by city residents and visitors. So it would be focusing on the main corridor streets. And those would be Ellsworth and, you know, the ones that you can think of, Ellsworth, North Lincoln, South Lincoln, you know, State Street in either direction, you know, perhaps Jennings, perhaps, you know, some of the, some of the other streets that are the main streets in and out of the city. You know, those are the streets that we want to make sure that as people are coming into town, Salem is impressive to them. You know, but not only that, we want to be impacting most of the citizens, you know, that exist with this funding. So we're targeting those streets that are most traveled by most people. So that would be phase 2, and that would be what would happen in the second year. Now, the last step in the plan is, you know, the group decided that, you know, because we have changes in administration, because we have changes in council members, you know, in order to kind of institutionalize the intent of this going forward, that a special committee would be put together for annual review that would be made up of administration, council, and other constituencies, so that going forward, those streets that are selected for pavement are within the spirit of this ordinance and this tax money being collected. So it's possible that there is funding available above and beyond what's being collected. There are grant monies that could be pursued that could enable us to do more with the money than we are projecting right now. Should that happen, there's the possibility of downtown parking lots being done with the funding. There's the possibility of signage being upgraded, you know, directing people around the downtown. You know, but that and those types of improvements would be things that would be for further discussion by a special oversight committee that would follow this funding as we go through the 5-year period. So that's the plan. You know, it's a 2-phase plan as far as making improvements. You know, the steps are to get a note on the funding up front on the cash flow, and then also putting a special committee together, you know, on the back end, should it pass, that makes sure that oversees the expenditure of the funding and reviews the plans going forward. Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think at one of the past meetings when we talked, one of the costs I think that we had to keep in mind would be if there needed to be repairs to any storm sewers.
Right.
These numbers, I assume they don't take into account any potential cost of repairs or up, you know, if we're tearing up or working on a street and that needed to be done. Is there any, is that included in
At
any
this
of this?
point, these 43 streets do not include that as far as I know. Engineering and the utility department were part of that meeting also, so that they can be aware of it. You know, funds like Ohio Public Works funding and other funds that might apply to substructure would be the subject of you know, grant proposals should a street be identified that has substructure work that's needed. So those specific streets, we haven't gone into depth on where the substructure needs work, you know, at this level. That again is something that during the special committee, you know, they would have to look to oversee that should this pass. And the mayor has a comment on that too.
Point of clarification, the list did have 43 on it, now it only has 41. So if you go down the list, you'll find 41. We removed North Ellsworth and South Lincoln as part of phase 2. So we didn't feel it was fair to show those two on this list as phase 1, even though they are part of our overall intended project. But that would be phase 2. Those are the ones that were going to be done perhaps a little bit more elaborately with trying to replace the sidewalks, curbs, and taking a look at the storm sewer system beneath. If any of these streets that are on the list do require water line replacements or sanitary sewer line replacements, the utility department has a copy, and they will make their recommendations at the time. If we have the vote and confidence of the taxpayers, they will make an approach to us about what streets they'd like to get in and change some water lines or sanitary sewer lines. So the list that you have has 41. There were 43 that we removed, North Ellsworth and South Lincoln for phase 2.
Yeah, the planning will get more in depth should the tax pass. Right now, this is the spirit of you know, this just explains to the voters, these are the streets we're looking at in phase 1. That's the spirit behind phase 2, is to focus on those streets that are most traveled. And then should the tax pass, you know, that committee will take a more in-depth look at the costs and streets. Are there any other comments?
Yeah,
Mr. Brown?
Just one thing I'd like to add, while I can still got my voice. Excuse
You
me.
want to put the microphone by your mouth, Mr. Brown?
Pardon?
Can you put the microphone there? There you go, so people
I'd
can
come
hear
right
you.
talk anyway, but this plan, of course, as we all know, is tentative on the income tax passing. I think we've looked at this long enough. I think it's time maybe to get into a conversation about how we're going to get this passed, how we're going to get involved in this as a group of council members. I see only one obstacle in our course of attack on this is the fact that everybody sitting here has a full-time job. Selling this to the people is going to be a full-time job. I'm not asking everybody sitting here that's got a full-time job to take a month off your work and do it. But this is going to be hard to sell to people I've talked to on the streets. I've had a lot of people that are for it, a lot of people are against it. A lot of people say, hey, I don't want to talk about it. But I'm out there before I got very sick. But and I've had people call me on the phone. And I tell them this, I say, hey, the city needs to do something. And it's your obligation as a resident of Salem to help us get this project done if we can do it. I've walked door to door in this city of Salem 3 times, the whole city. And I know what it takes to cover all these houses. You're not going to do it 3 hours a night between now and get this passed. You've got to take a bigger step than you really want to. You have to go out and buy signs, place signs around town. Let people know this tax is up. Has anybody thought about putting up signs? We're just going to go talking to people. This is not going to be an easy sell. I'll do all I can.
That's great. This meeting is kind of like the first step to
Okay,
congeal.
well, I think it better be a
council
first and
around it.
final step because
Yeah.
we don't have much time.
Right, 40 days,
Mr. Cushman
Right.
knows that.
40 days.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk. That's probably all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Papadopoulos.
If we needed to buy signs and we needed to put a mailer together and things like that, where do we start to get the financing to pay for something?
I'll be honest, I don't know if that is an expense the council should undertake. No.
Well, I
There
wonder
are-
what they've done in the past.
A pack, probably some of it.
Yeah, there's a PAC underway that's following this.
Because I think Clyde's right. I think we have to sell it.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, this is unique in one way, in that both political parties, the Democrat and the Republican Party, have supported this idea. And it is my understanding, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, it's my understanding that those parties are putting together signs and maybe a mailer to get out to the public. I say that tentatively because I haven't heard complete confirmation, but I do know that the support of the Democratic and Republican parties are unified on this, and they are trying to form support for it within their own ranks. So I believe there are signs in the works, and I believe there's a mailer in the works, and I know that we need donations, citizens and businesses to step forward, and so many times we're all asked to do that. But in this case, this money cannot come from council. Absolutely, it can't happen. It's got to come from donations, and hopefully the parties have some reserve funds as well to help out with this cause. Mr. Brown is absolutely right. The word needs to get out. People need to understand how desperate this is. All we are doing at this point is maintaining the repairs in the streets with more patchwork. We're not making any progress. We're falling behind. And as I'm looking at these lists, the mayor said we're looking at maybe 10 miles. Well, to my knowledge, are there 60-some miles in the city, Mayor?
Yeah, there's 60 lane miles in the city.
And we're looking at, in phase 1, addressing 10 miles of it. There's 50-some miles of streets to go.
Over the past 4 years, we've done 3 miles of streets. And a lot of our streets, not a significant portion, but a lot of them are concrete, so they don't require the same type of expense. There may be some patchwork and cutout that has to be done. But this represents the basic need of the community to have have streets out in the neighborhoods that are nice, as well as the main streets that we've tried to focus on here in the last 4 years.
Some of these streets have never been touched since they were
It's
initially put in. Is
been
that
a
right?
long time, correct.
Yeah.
And so some of the streets may last actually 20 years because they're just residential, but everybody should be impacted, whether you live on that street or a friend of yours comes to see you and drives on your street, or family comes to see you. There's going to be an awful lot of residents that are going to travel these 41 streets that are on this list. And that would be $2.6 million of that total that would be collected over 5 years, just to get this one kicked off. We've been told that we would be looked upon very well by the major contractors that do asphalt work for this volume of work. And these figures that I used were based on what we did this year for summer streets, spending about $500,000 and dividing it by the length to come up with an average cost. So the first phase may actually be less. If there is less cost than $2.6 million, I'd like to keep that figure the same and just do other streets at the same time. Because there are other streets that should be done too, but that could be with the summer street program that we currently have every summer, but it's limited in scope to about $400,000 a year. So this represents 6 or 7 years worth of paving all at one time, and to continue to do the patchwork, we keep falling behind. So we need to address the infrastructure portion of our streets as soon as possible, so it's a good effort that council is putting forward here.
Mr. Grove?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, I know since you've been in the office, you've been providing us with an update yearly as to what streets have been paved as part of our, at that point, ongoing paving.
Right.
Do you have any records going back prior to your administration? Do we have any idea, apart from when you've been in office, what streets have been paved when?
Yeah, I actually, how far back did I go? 2008, 2007? Yeah, I asked Housen Baird, who does our summer street engineering program, and I got information going back to 2008. So for the previous 4 years, I don't have anything back before that. And I could provide you with that information.
No, where I'm taking this is, do we have plans to maintain a database of what streets are coming up, not just next year, but 2 years, 3 years, based on, Street A was done 5 years ago, and experience has shown it's going to need to be done 2 more years. So, we've talked about doing planning for replacing police cars and equipment and things like that. We should be doing the same thing on the streets. So, is that in the works?
That's the way we've done it for the past 4 years.
But how far out, though? How far out is the plan? Just next year? Because we've got now one for 16, but do we have something in mind that what probably is going to need to be done in 17, and then in 18 and 19? Like, how far out are we looking?
Well, I do not have one that goes beyond 2016, but I expanded 2016 to include all those streets. If we were only going to do what the summer street program would provide, it wouldn't be 2.6 million, it'd be 400,000. So we have expanded that out. If the tax increase fails, that's the plan for the next 8 years, or
I
7
understand.
years.
I guess the point,
As necessary. So you have the list for the next 8 years, 7 or 8 years.
I understand. And assuming, and thinking positively, it passes, that doesn't mean that after 2 years, we're not doing anything more than for 6 years. We're going to continue to repair as needed.
Oh, certainly.
But I guess this is, the question is, so if this passes and you're doing 6 or 7 years worth, let's move all that 7 years up now to 2 years from now.
Correct.
And so do we have that documented? I guess the bottom line is, do we have any sort of record database that says this is the state of every street in the city? This is the absolute worst street, and this one, which was just repaved 10 minutes ago, is our absolute best street, and then everything in between, so that we can keep a handle on what's coming up, or what probably is coming up in the next year, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, we can develop that plan. What we've done primarily is every spring, they go out and look at the streets and decide which ones are the worst. Without having sufficient funds to make projections beyond $400,000, it would be nice. When this plan was developed, I had asked the street foreman and the service director to go out and find the worst streets, and that's how they developed this plan. The very worst streets would have only been the ones for 2016, but we went beyond that. And we looked at the streets based on the tonnage, and the street foreman did keep an accurate count of how many tons of asphalt he used and where he used them. So that was the first tip-off, is how many tons of asphalt patch did we have to use on any one of these streets. And it amounts to 88% of all the patchwork that we had to do. These streets represent 88%. When you include Second and Third Street, it's 88% of all the patchwork that we did. The amount of time that the street department will have available for other tasks is going to be greatly enhanced. It'll also cut down, a lot of the labor's part of their work, and we can concentrate on other things that are necessary to be done, stormwater drainage, for example. So, but no, I do not have a plan that's beyond this one at this stage.
And will you entertain of having a review, when the streets foreman and the service director or their representatives get sent out and say, let's get an idea of what could be repaired the year after Phase 2 and 3 and 4?
We would definitely have a plan for the summer street program for whoever's mayor. We'll have a plan for 2016, 17, and 18 as just the normal process. So in addition to this $2.6 million, I would anticipate somewhere close to $1 million more would be spent on streets. If these are done, then we would certainly have to develop a plan for what streets do need to have work done. If they're not at a point where they need to be done, then perhaps the money could be kept in capital and be used for the equipment that we need that's aging.
Thank you.
So we won't repave a street until it's absolutely necessary to have it be done.
Mr. Paparose?
When we get bids for streets like this, because I have no history of this, are they guaranteed bids
For 1 year.
for 1 year?
That's typical, 1 year.
Okay.
And let me address Councilman Drummond. We also have an awful lot of alleys that need to be looked at too. And none of these reports include any of the alley work that's necessary. So a lot of patching and problems go on with those. I've had requests from a lot of people to do alleys, but we're trying to do thoroughfares and residential streets before we get to the alleys. So it would allow for that too. But 1 year is typical
Okay.
for asphalt companies. And the 1 year guarantee is what was used for this last year's paving, where we see some problems with the mix. And that will be redone this year by Central Allied, is that correct? Yeah, Central Allied, we invoked the 1 year, and they agreed that they had some bad mix asphalt when they did Southeast Boulevard and South Union and a couple other streets, so they'll be redoing that at no cost.
Is the pricing relative to the price of oil?
Yes, definitely.
So it possibly could be, we could have a little advantage in that regard.
Well, the price right now is obviously lower than it was a year ago at this time, but it does have a direct impact on the cost of the asphalt, the oil prices.
I think it's important to note too that, in wealthier times with 60, miles of street, we were able to do 6 miles a year and schedule, every 10 years a street gets done, or put it on a revolving schedule type kind of thing, and not as much patch was needed because, everything was going to get redone. We've been operating now for years with just having to patch because that's all the money that we've had, or else choosing those streets for which there's some type of matching fund, or or it's a main artery or something like that. So this enables us to, for a period of 5 years at least, operate as if we were in wealthier times again, and improve the city. And if it looks good and if the voters like it, then we just continue with the plan if they want to renew.
Well, obviously, this is a temporary tax. At some point in time, if the voters like what they see and they see deterioration taking place again, they might consider making it a permanent tax, but that's 5 years, 10 years down the road. right now, we need to, with the help of the taxpayers and council's approval of putting this on the ballot, move forward with getting our city back in shape. A lot of residents have streets that are in very poor condition and would be very happy. I don't know how many people live on these streets that are on this list, but it has to be a couple thousand, I would think. 10 miles of streets. The average lot width is 100 feet or less, so there's a lot of families that are going to be impacted by this.
Mr.
This
Drummond?
is a slightly off topic, but do we have any idea why the streets in Ward 2 are that much more in need of repairs? I mean, is it due to,
I simply have found out over time, and maybe Councilman Brown can attest to this, he's been this ward councilman before, but they were let go. I haven't used the ward locations as a reasoning behind what I'm going to do, but if you had the list that I provided from 2012, 13, 14, and this year, you'd find that there's an awful lot of money that's been spent in Ward 2.
I recall Mr. Brown thanking you for doing a bunch of work in
Yeah.
Ward 2, but there's still a lot of work, and I just wasn't sure if it maybe
Yeah.
just due to traffic, heavier vehicles using the streets.
I think
or
it's
something.
just because they were neglected over time. And I used the street department foreman's analysis of where the asphalt has to be placed and how much effort and time it takes, and it doesn't make any difference to me what ward it's in. It means that street needs to be done. So in the past, I think Ward 2 was ignored,
Thank you.
more so than it should have been.
Any other questions?
Just,
Mr. Brown?
I'm going to try to talk. I know it's streets, of course, we all know that, but we do have a Streets, Alleys, and Sidewalks Committee, of which Mr. Paprotis is chairman. Was he involved in this project whatsoever? Or did we not have him involved in it?
Not
We-
in some
we
of
developed
these
the list
meetings, he's
with the
definitely
help of the
welcome,
street
but,
foreman.
yeah.
Okay.
Again, 88% of the patch goes onto these streets, so it's not that difficult to determine which ones there were. Had Councilman Paparotis been involved, he would have agreed. So, but it wasn't because we didn't think that to have you involved. It was just more a natural process of the people that work with the streets to tell us which ones were the worst ones.
Right. In response to
You've
Clyde's
got a
remark,
microphone, I can't hear you.
in response to Clyde's remark, my expertise in streets and sidewalks are pretty limited in comparison to the people that do this for a living. So I take their advisement above probably my own experience, and I figured we'd take the results of what their findings are and maybe discuss them.
There will be a committee formed to decide what's going to get done in the future, and the monies that are collected from this tax will go into a fund separate from the general fund and the capital fund as it exists today. And so council can give great consideration as to how we're going to move forward. The normal summer street program list typically is presented and taken and given a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, if this passes, within the first couple council meetings after that, we'll have to look at putting an ordinance together to form a special committee of council, and then we'll be working with the auditor to do what it takes to put a note together. So those are the initial steps.
What did you said that at .25 would bring in 125,000 per year, or 1,250,000 per year?
About
Roughly.
1.2 to 1.25 per year, yes.
And so we're thinking of how much would the note be for?
About 5 million, maybe. I mean, we'll have to, it depends on current interest rates at the time and, what kind of terms we can get. Maybe the auditor can better answer that.
And who's the question?
Just projected revenue from the 0.25%, and then how much that could be, how much of a note that could gain.
Well, just a slight correction is that we would not borrow all of it the first year. When the tax goes through and we want to do 2.6 million, we'll get a note for 2.6 million. And then the following year, when whether we do the rest or another 2 million, what the taxes had paid the first year, which we know will not be 2.6, it'll probably be half of that, then we would pay that note off and then take another one out. You know what I mean? So that way, we're not paying interest on all of the 5 million when we're only using 2.
Right.
So, I hope I answered your question. Okay. Is there anything else? Okay.
Are there any other questions? You're holding back.
No.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Brown, can you hear me?
Yes.
Aside of signs, maybe a mailer, your experience on council, what do we need to do to get this word out?
A lot of people see where it's coming from, they'll throw it away. I'd say signs would be your best bet.
Is there anything else that the
Pardon?
city can do? Is there anything else the city or council can do to reach the voters?
I'll give it some more consideration, but the signs definitely have to be done
Okay.
in improper locations.
In your past experience, what about a town hall meeting?
It's hard to get people to turn up.
Yeah.
You may get the same people. If you have 3 meetings, you get the same people at 3 meetings. There's too many people in Salem that just don't care, don't understand. They don't vote, okay? And you got big problems here within the city, in the population itself.
Yeah.
And I'm out there every day, except since I got sick, I haven't been out that much. But it's going to be a sell, but I think we can do it if we pull together. And it's going to take, like you say, Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else working together to sell this. But I have confidence. I think it's possible we can do this. But I
But
think
there
the
is
first
some,
step
there is some
signs.
inherent danger in putting this list out with these bolded streets. Because the mentality might be, my street's not on there, I'm not gonna vote for this. I would caution against that. Think what's better for your city. You know, sometime back in the 60s, when that 1% income tax went into place.
Right.
That was a chunk of money. We're now asking everybody,
I remember
step up to the
when-
plate,
I remember.
1/4%.
I remember
It is
when it
our
came-
time.
Yeah.
It is our time to take our streets back.
Now's the time to pick up the slack we lost. I think we can do it. I think it's a matter of everybody taking the effort and time. I'll get on I can't do a lot of running around, but I'll do a lot of time on the telephone, calling everybody I know, tell them if I can put a sign in their yard for this and so forth.
Okay.
I think we can do it.
Okay.
I think
If
we
you have
can do
any
it.
ideas on it,
Pardon?
if you have any ideas on that,
I would-
now's the time.
Let me give it some more thought,
Thank you.
and I'll give you a call and keep everybody informed.
If there is no other questions or comments, then this is the plan that's being forwarded. Mr. Apple, yes.
Mr. Cushman, to answer your question, having been through several campaigns myself, going and knocking on doors. People want to be able to talk to you, be able to ask questions. Most of the time, it's shown that flyers that go out, most people look at those for about a total of 7 seconds.
Yeah.
There's statistics on that. So, and with that, you certainly want bullet points so that they can get the main message, as opposed to putting a lot of things on there that they're not going to read with it. Signs help, but the main thing, and it might not be what everybody wants to hear, it means us going out and knocking on doors.
But do we need to put together a sheet of talking points?
Right.
That we're all on the same page?
Right.
And then do we all, hit a ward at a time, or?
Well, I mean, I think if everybody does it, Mr. Brown makes the point that, you can't cover all that ground. If everybody covers some ground, with as many people as we have, we can get it done within a month's time. But it's going to take some effort to do it. It's going to be giving up your Saturdays to do that. And if you add in some time after work, you add all that time together, it can be done. And if everybody does it, one of us or two of us can't do it. It's going to require everybody. But I've always found that people like to see the person talking to them. So that's just my 2 cents with regards to that.
One last point, if you
Yes.
don't mind. It really wouldn't be much point going door to door to every house. Get a voter list of who votes in the city of Salem, an updated voter list, and go by that. One street you go down may only have 10 people on a street where the residents vote. I found that out my second time through, knocking on doors that, well, I don't vote, I don't want to talk about it. But the voters are going to be very concerned, so that's the ones we got to hit, the ones that are registered voters.
Well, I will caution that, Clyde, that with issue 3 on the ballot, you don't know who's going to show up and vote now.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
yes.
And, you know, I know it's been said, but I think it's something that should be reiterated that, you know, as a council, I think we should really be thanking that the leaders of our two major parties in the area have gotten together and have come together and seem to agree that this is something that needs to be done. Certainly, this would be a whole different discussion if we couldn't get agreement there. So for those that are listening or watching, thank you for that. I think that makes this job a little easier. Not real easy, but a little easier.
Well, you know, one of the turning points of this, just to contrast with the last election where there was an ask, is that this is specifically targeted to streets, and there's a bit more specificity behind the planning of which streets and how it's going to get, you know, administered, you know, once it goes through. So that, I think, satisfied, you know, those that were not for it last time. Ms. Dickey?
I just want to say that, you know, I'm going out because I'm campaigning at this time and going door to door in my ward, and I get a lot of questions from the people who do come to the door and talk to me about, you know, what I think about this. And you know, sometimes it's kind of scary to give your true opinion about it because you're asking people to dig into their pockets for something on faith in what you're telling them. And I think that a plan like this really does help, because it shows them that we're serious about it and we have a plan and we're not just taking the money and then we'll think about what we're going to do. And so I'm really hopeful with everything we're doing in the city and the plans that are really starting to roll now, that Salem's future is looking better and the town physically is going to look better. And I try to convey that to people with a real positive, hopeful attitude when I go in there, and not just, you know, give them a lot of crap. You know, this is what we really are committed to doing, and you need to keep the people here who are committed to continuing that work over the next 5 years. I also think it helps that it's only 5 years, because then they have the chance to have a limit to that, to see what we really will do and follow through with before they commit forever. So I just hope that people really look within their hearts and their budgets and determine whether it's something they can afford to do and whether it's worth the investment in their property.
With that, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion to adjourn the meeting.
Sticky seconds, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Nice job.
I know. You're right. Someone says my street's not getting done, but someone said my street's not getting done for 5 years. I think we might have talked about that, kind of the infrastructure, but it just wasn't identified.
Good night.
You don't have long-term funding, that's my point, and I'm not, again, water's under the bridge, I'm not, I'm just saying that was my reasoning to say.